Professor Kuckelberg's talk plus a musical concert. I welcome, on behalf of all members of the organizing committee of the symposium, I welcome with us Professor Anna Bastatou, Rector of the University of Ioannina. We have the honor and pleasure to have her with us. And Anna, I take the opportunity to thank the University of Ioannina for its hospitality, the fact that we are in this very beautiful building, and that for these 3 days, we had the opportunity to be here. I would also like to thank Risario Foundation and our corporate, let's say, partners and sponsors, that is Procos, printing company, and also the regional winery of Catogliavero. So I give the podium to Mrs. Bastatou to address a greeting on behalf of the Council, the University Council of the University of Ioannina, and from the part of the Rectorate of the University.
I would also like to welcome you here tonight. This is a great evening, this is a great event. In the beginning I was surprised by the title, because Professor McGuinney told me this about, 3 months ago. I was really surprised, but then I thought, this actually makes sense. And I think Professor Kuckelberg, you're here to make this sense for us. So I'm really looking forward to your talk. So I would like to welcome you all on behalf of our university here. And I hope you really enjoy the scenery and the weather, which is good. And also you had a great meeting, I think, this morning, and you're going to have tomorrow. I would like to talk to you with a few words about what I have understood about our professor who is going to give the talk tonight. So Professor Mark Kuckelberg has been working for the past years within the fields of ethics and philosophy of technology, in particular robotics and artificial intelligence. His research interests also include the field of healthcare, with emphasis on care robots. Kuckelberg's work on care robots goes into two complementary directions. First, he tries to develop an account of good care that can be used to evaluate the rise of care robots. And second, it explains how the use of care robots is situated into the broader project of modernity in healthcare. He criticizes this project because not only does it try to mechanize healthcare, but it also tries to mechanize human beings. In response to these challenges, Kuckelberg proposed a modified capabilities approach to care and emphasized its inherent social dimension. He claims that the issue is not technologies themselves, not reversibility as such, and not the potential violation of the principles of privacy or autonomy alone, but the question as to what good care and the good life is, for us as humans, for us in a particular context, and for us as the unique persons we are. For this first paragraph, I would like very much to have Professor McGuinney, because we had a private session. She gave me some lecture of your work, Professor, so I hope I understood it well. So I would like to thank Professor McGuinney for that. But also in our part, from our medical school, we are teaching also medical humanities. And we had the pleasure to have Professor McGuinney also giving us some lectures. So I would like to tell you another aspect which I would like to communicate with you. And that is that in the modern world, we constantly mutilate our abilities, particularly our cognitive abilities, and erase our knowledge and feelings. And that's for the care of in favor of robots of artificial intelligence. Us scientists are constantly censoring ourselves, and I think this is as unscientific. This is linked to existential issues, and I think there is a current trend in our world for objectification, and we're kind of like minimizing ourselves to numbers and pictures, and not narration, and not human feelings. However, I think we cannot afford to be deprived by the timely valued tools and practices based on arbitrary appraisals. Technology is valued, but should be controlled by humans. And I believe, and I think you believe also, the machine will conquer only if us, humans, abandon our abilities. And we are coming to a world where we will voluntarily abandon this, because we will come to believe that they are better. But I think that we are the gold standard, and we should stick on that. So I'm looking forward to your talk.
So thank you, Anna. Allow me to give you a very short presentation of the work of Mark Buchtelberg. So Professor Buchtelberg, whom we have the great honor and pleasure to have with us today, is one of the most influential philosophers of technology worldwide. Mark teaches philosophy of media and technology at the Department of Philosophy of the University of Vienna. My first encounter with Mark was back in 2013, nearby in Corfu, at a conference on law and computer ethics organized at Ionian University by Maria Kanelopoulou-Botti. Meanwhile, Mark has been around teaching philosophy of technology in many academic institutions in Belgium, the Netherlands, Great Britain, before finally settling down in Austria and Vienna. He's a member of numerous national and European committees of expertise on issues related to automation, robotics, and AI, such as the High-Level Expert Group on Artificial Intelligence for the European Commission, the Austrian Robotics Council, Robotic, and the Austrian Advisory Council on Automated Mobility. He's also a fellow of the World Technology Network. Mark holds numerous honorary positions as scholar and expert, among which I would sort out first his chairmanship at the Institute of Philosophy of the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague, having an active involvement in setting out a new international EU-funded research center of environmental and technology ethics, unique in its kind in Central and Eastern Europe, a novel and very promising institutional initiative, and also his membership at the advisory board of the University of Milan's Research Center on the Philosophy of Technology. Last but not least, numerous appointments as president or managing director in international scientific organizations such as the International Society for Philosophy and Technology. Mark is the author of more than 12 books on philosophy of technology, as well as ethics and politics of technologies, with a special focus on digital technologies and AI. And of course, I do not mention the numerous papers, studies in collective volumes, and so on and so forth. It's extremely difficult to give in a few words the twists and turns of Mark's questioning on technology over the last 10 years, especially the many original ways in which he treats the threats and promises of the late modern technological condition. The background of Mark's questioning of the way intelligent, so to speak, technologies change our view of the world and ourselves is more philosophy ethics in its intersection with philosophical anthropology and the certain theme of the human person. This lies already at the core of his early books around the completion of his PhD thesis back to 2003. I quote among his first, let's say, works, Liberation and Passion, Reconstructing the Passion Perspective on Human Being and Freedom, back to 2002, The Metaphysics of Autonomy, The Reconciliation of Ancient and Modern Ideals of the Person, back to 2004, Imagination and Principles, an essay on the role of imagination in moral reasoning, back 2007, Growing Moral Relations, Critique of Moral Status Ascription, back to 2012. A critical moment in Mark's intellectual itinerary, and in a certain sense, the work in which he first combines moral philosophy with contemporary philosophy of technology, is his 2013 book on human being at risk, enhancement, technology, and the evaluation of vulnerability, transformation, by Springer. From then on, it becomes clear that at the heart of his philosophical questioning comes the issue of the moral relations which are inevitably intertwined in the human-machine encounter. This is evident in practically all the books, papers, and studies which he has produced within the last decade. Needless to say that Mark is a prolific author, and due to the actuality and urgency of the questions he raises, he's an influential thinker and critic of our times. Let us take a very quick glance at the books he authored, which, for reasons of comprehension, I tried to organize into three main categories. First, books that further expand his moral questioning on ethics, which within the framework of the human-machine relations. That is, his 2020 book, AI Ethics by MIT Press, Self-Improvement, Technologies of the Soul in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, back to 2022 by Columbia University Press, Robot Ethics, 2022 by Cambridge, MIT Press, and within the broader framework, two monographs on ethics of finance, money machines, electronic financial technologies, distancing and responsibility in global finance, back to 2015 by Ashgate, and environmental ethics, his 2015 environmental skill, motivation, knowledge, and the possibility of a non-romantic environmental ethics. Second category of works that are more oriented towards a systematic approach to the philosophy of technology, as in his very useful for students and researchers, written in the style of a textbook, Introduction to Philosophy of Technology, a 2019 book by Oxford University Press. Yet Mark's viewpoint is always innovative and even subversive, even in these, I would say, more conventional books of his. For instance, a very subversive book in the history of philosophy of technology, his 2017 book, New Romantic Cyborgs, Romanticism, Information Technology, and the End of Machine. A third category, books that introduce new hermeneutic tools such as those of techno-performance and narrative, elaborating further on the relation between technology and language, especially his 2019 book, Moved by Machines, Performance Metaphors and Philosophy of Technology, and also his 2020 book, Narrative and Technology Ethics. This last thought path has led Professor Kuckelberg to a surpassing of ethics towards a comprehensive practical philosophy of digital technologies and AI, which recognizes a proper place for political philosophy. It is by no chance accidental that his most recent books put the accent on the political dimension of our uses of digital technologies and AI. That is his book on the political philosophy of AI, an introduction by PolitiPress, and his very, very recent 2023 book on digital technologies, temporality, and the politics of coexistence. I suppose that this novel line of questioning will be the core, let's say, of today's talk by Mark, which will be on digital technologies and the ethics and politics of coexistence. So, Mark, let me once more thank you for being here with us in Ioannina. And without further ado, I invite you to the podium. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and first of all, thank you for both introductions. Thank you, Rectora, for especially coming here tonight and for picking up my work on more the medical technology, in particular robotics. Thank you, Hof, for your introduction. It's interesting to hear how you make an overview of the books and what you get out of it, and that's a nice conversation also to continue later. Welcome everyone in this lecture. Tonight I will introduce the book that has just been mentioned by Golfo on coexistence, yeah, I will use it also as an opportunity to indeed say more about politics today in this age of digital technologies. How can I operate the PowerPoint slides? For you to know the context of this book, I wrote this book in the pandemic. So this is the, the atmosphere of the book. And of course part of that kind of atmosphere is still with us, part of it luckily not. But just for you to know that this is the somewhat darker context in which I wrote the book, but I hope that many of the things that I say are still relevant today. Today I will also focus more on the ethics and politics part. So if we look at the title, of course there's also temporality in it. I still think it's important, so I will also talk about it, but I will put the emphasis on the normative questions, on the ethics and politics. I think Golfo has already said so much about me that I don't think I need to introduce myself still. Let me just say that if I stand here today and indeed have written these books about technology, that of course I benefited enormously from so many people, from main figures, so first generation figures in philosophy of technology, including Andrew Feenberg, who has been talking to us yesterday. And so that's important to know, and also of course all the other people that I met in so many places, and so much interesting work that I've read. So Golfo already mentioned the book Human Being at Risk. This was actually the first time for me to bring in a bit more existential perspective, in this case on technological risk, and in engagement with the topic of human enhancement. The book I will present now and in the talk is continues with that. So on the one hand, it's a continuation of the more political side of what I'm doing now, but on the other hand, it's also a continuation of this interest in the relation between the existential and technology. Context of the book, but also context today still. Of course, we find ourselves in a situation where there are a number of crises upon us. And climate change, unfortunately, is still upon us. It's still there. It doesn't go away, also not when we close our eyes for it. The pandemic is also in some sense still there, but we prefer not to pay too much attention. The economic crisis is of course very much there, also in Greece, and unfortunately, when I wrote a book, I wrote about war, but unfortunately in the meantime, reality has added another war. So this is the context, and I think this kind of global context, also regional but also global, does something to us. I think it's something that that we cannot just ignore, and part of the reason of that is that we use digital technologies, and that we use internet, we use all kinds of apps that connect us to the wider world. And McLuhan already in his time saw this more, what he would say, kind of globalization of consciousness. And this globalization of consciousness is a burden. It's nice. There was, especially in the 90s, a lot of optimism about internet, we get connected with many people, and this is great for academics, of course, in the first place. But there's also a burden because we learn about what happens in other parts of the world, and we learn that we also have something to do with it, or at least we feel that we should respond to it. So there is a kind of responsibility side to it and an ethical side to this. Also a politics, but a politics that is not just about a distant kind of politics. The politics is also something that touches us through the digital technologies. And I'm interested in that. I'm very interested in the relation between, us as individuals, as persons, with certain feelings, with certain experiences, also existential experiences, on the one hand, and the wider world and what happens there. And then, of course, how technology shapes that, influences that. And one reaction we can do against all this almost violence, literally, but also metaphorically, that comes to us is, of course, to retreat. Already in Hellenistic times, in the area that's now called Greece, I think that there was already this kind of reaction. So there is philosophy after Plato and Aristotle that is a lot about the good life for yourself as a person. And later, in the first centuries, there is this kind of retreat to the self. And it's a very normal reaction because we are very much, we try to somehow survive this, so we retreat in ourselves, and today I think there's this obsession with self-improvement, which again leads them to use of technologies. But I think there are other options possible, so in this talk I want to outline some other options. And the way I did that in the book is to look at time, existence and technology. And time, which is a philosophical topic that is very old already. For example, Augustine already, who was of course a scholar also in general in the Mediterranean world, was trying to grapple with that. And so from the topic of our time, which is the big world, the global, I want to first go to the topic of my time, right? So my experience of time, temporality. What about my existence? What about our personal existence, and how this then relates? So what we see in, of course, technology is always the focus. So what I see first is that, as we all know, that there is this feeling that we have always of having not enough time. Not enough time to do our work, not enough time to do important things in life. And as contemporary academics, we feel pressed for time. Now, technologies are sold to us usually as means that help us to save time. So in a time that professors, for example, would write letters to each other, this would take time, of course. So email was seen as a way to save time, so you didn't have to always write these long letters to each other. But of course, with that, like with every new technology, something is also lost with that. And one thing that is lost is that actually this time also was slower. I never had that luxury in my life. But yeah, with email, the idea is you save time, but the problem is that the paradoxical thing that happens is that we actually then, the time speeds up. The experience of time speeds up. Because what happens with email is now that we have so much emails that we no longer, that we cannot do them easily, all of them. We cannot do quickly, and so in the end we actually end up spending more time than in a time when we were just having to write this one letter. So the technology turns into its opposite. And this is also something that, that I already noted and conceptualized in the book Human Being at Risk, where I said like, yeah, technology is meant to make us less vulnerable, but actually it creates new vulnerabilities. So technology can solve problems, but technology also creates new problems. And so here the problem is that we lack time. What also happens when we think about existential issues is that, so one thing that when we think about our own existence is that we can become aware of our finitude, and that human life in general is finite, but also that our personal life is finite. And the whole existential tradition in philosophy tries to come to terms with that and has also solutions for that. What I mean here is that digital technologies also mediate that. They also kind of intervene in this process, because through digital technologies we are confronted with that. We are confronted, for example, with deaths in war, far away from us, but also through social media we are confronted also with that closer to us. And that can make us aware of our own finitude. So this is very, technologies there are not standing outside that process, but mediate that process and shape that process, influence that process. More generally, existentially, one can say we need to make sense of this world, right? And this includes also making sense of those technologies and giving them a place in our lives. Here too, I think there's a personal, but there is also the bigger picture again. The discourse about artificial intelligence today is also about the end and about end times. It's kind of apocalyptic sometimes even. So here technology makes us touch upon issues of ultimate concern, as a theologian once called it. So whatever we might think about religion, in our existential way of relating to the world, we have those personal issues about finitude, but also questions about where is humanity going to end up, and is the end near? Some would say, and even if the end is not near, how are we going to shape that future? When we look at digital technologies, they also do a second thing, and that's also again paradoxical, because when we experience doing things with digital technologies, there's a kind of immersive present happening. We are in the now when we do this. That we are very much busy with, there's a busyness when we use technologies, for example, on social media, when we have to present ourselves and perform ourselves. However, at the same time, these technologies distract us from being in the present, because we are not in the moment in the sense of being present to ourselves. We are continuously distracted, and we are thrown into the future, sometimes by AI, for example, which predicts, which means it kind of fixes the future. So here we already see how technologies have an influence on temporality, on time and the way we experience time. So this is not the time of physics, but it's a time that we experience. More generally, what it means to be human, what it means to be vulnerable also is shaped by digital technologies because it is so much part of the life world, right? So it touches upon these things. It's not just a tool, it has this wider effect. And that is what I explore also in the book, and I create conceptual language about this, a language that uses the words process, narrative and performance. Performance that was already in the book mentioned by Golfo, moved by machines, and narrative was also already there. Process is something that I was interested in more recently, in particular process philosophy also. So that's in this book, and also in an article, for example, that I wrote for a volume edited by Glenn Miller, a volume that was kind of and is dedicated to Carl Mitcham, who was another first generation philosopher of technology. What the book also does, and what I will stress now, is that to ask the normative questions: how should we relate to time, and how should we coexist? So not the existential questions that are about the individual only, but also coexistence, the social aspect. So first, how to think about the relation between digital technology and time. In summary, my point is that this should be studied as being a matter of process and becoming, as a matter of co-authoring stories, and as a matter of techno performances. So let me go into these very briefly. First, process philosophy is a very interesting way, I think, to look at technology. Instead of looking at technology as just being a thing, like artificial intelligence is often imagined as being this thing, for example, a kind of robot, or a machine standing somewhere in a room as if it's like HAL or some computer from Star Trek or something. Well, this is only one way of looking at technology. Technology as artifacts. It's the way I encountered in contemporary philosophy of technology, especially after the so-called empirical turn. So when I engaged with philosophers in the US and in the Netherlands especially, this was kind of the mainstream view. What I would like to explore here is, let's look at technology as a process. If it's true, like Whitehead and Bergson said, that the world is process, is becoming, and that object and subject, that they are kind of entangled, so a non-dualistic view, then let's also see what that means for technology. What does it mean to see technology as a process? Well, one thing it means, if we take a non-dualistic view, is that you don't have first subjects and objects and then a relation between, and that's a bit the criticism I have towards post-phenomenology, for example, which then has a mediation between the two. With this view, we can see subjects and objects emerge from a process. So there's an interaction, for example, between humans and machines, and these humans and machines are not entirely predefined outside or before the process. What that means is that what I become and what technology emerges only after the process. For example, by using this email, we can say what email becomes is this instrument that speeds up things. What I become is a hurried and anxious self. So that's a result of that process, something that emerges from the process. Similarly, objective time, what we call objective time, is there, but it's at the same time created by our scientific instruments. Scientific instruments that measure, and the measuring is just as all kind of technological procedures and process is not neutral, but also brings this kind of time into being and makes us experience the world in terms of objective time rather than, for example, the time that we might feel in different ways. So I find it interesting to see technologies here as process or as emerging from processes. And then if we add a narrative approach, we can say more about technological processes, because then it turns out that these processes also have a structure, namely a structure that we give to it. We narrate, we tell stories, for example, about AI. I told this kind of story about my email. And that stories we always use to give meaning to our lives. It's a normal thing to do for human beings. We put together events and characters and make a meaningful whole. For example, a narrative about philosophy of technology, a narrative that draws together events of book publications and book readings. Now, if that's the case, then it's good to see that this narration is also always social. I do it as a person, but at the same time, I also gain from. I also give this meaning to other people. I make sense of other people, and other people are part of the story. So what this means for technology is that the story of climate change, for example, is a story of technology because it's about scientific instruments and data processes, but it's also a story where nature plays a role. It's a story where people play a role, where particular people play a role, for example, people who call attention to climate change. And so the stories we then tell about climate change are, again, not a neutral kind of thing, but in itself also help to create our current world. So narratives and technologies, they are tools, but at the same time organize our experience, organize our meaning giving, organize our existence. And in that sense, technologies co-write our narratives. They are part of it, they are object of the narrative. We tell stories about technology, but there's a sense in which the technologies also write the narratives, help us to make sense of ourselves. And then finally, to conclude that part about the concepts, I add performance, because narrative is very much language focused, and language is often understood in terms of text, especially in the postmodern post-structuralist tradition. But with performance, connecting also to the 90s after the high days of early 90s of postmodernism, I like the concept of performance and say that, it's not now the case that the technology just does things without us. We are part of it. We perform with technology, and the technologies make us perform in certain ways. For example, if I have a mobile phone, then the phone kind of makes me walk in a certain way. It makes me hold the phone in a certain way. So it choreographs us. And I am part of those techno performances and those choreographies. So I could say that even time itself is performed by the technologies and by us, so it's not only measured but also performed, because we experience it in ways through the technology. Also, ChatGPT, for example, can be seen as a techno performance. It's something that technology does, but also something that we do. So it's always humans and technologies that do things together. And now we get to the normative aspect, because then the question is like, well, do we want to give technology that power? What particular kind of power does technology have? Who or what shapes our techno-performances? Who makes decisions about these techno-performances? And the answer is that humans do that, and technologies, and then the question is which humans, and which technologies, and what exactly do they do to us. For example, email, if email makes my life hurried, that's a claim, a very specific claim, specific technology. Similarly, calendars, for example, also in a way choreograph us. They move me to the next meeting, they move me to the keynote. And through calendars we move other people, we move them to the meeting that we started. Phones literally make me move in a particular way. So these are all, in a way, the technology and the humans exercise power. So if that's the case, we have to ask more questions about that. Political questions and ethical questions. Are these techno-performances good for us? What are good processes, narratives and performances? What are good ways of relating to time? What are good times? And what is a good existence? So these are huge questions, questions that philosophers from the time of ancient Greece have tried to answer, but which now we can answer in a way that takes into account that technologies also shape our lives and our existence. The way I now want to talk about ethics is to say, like, well, we have to think about the individual and individual existence, but also about the social, about coexistence, next to taking into account that crucial role of technology. And what we then get is thinking about technology, but also thinking about technology in a way that looks at practices and the social nature of those practices. So here there is a relation to anthropology, to sociology, and so on. An interesting work on ethics of technology that can help here, thinking about what is the good life with technology, is from Borgman, who is based in the US. And here, I found it interesting in his work that, you know, if it's true that we are indeed distracted by digital technologies, it's good to think about what would the opposite be, right? So what does it mean not to be distracted? What kind of moments do we want them? Well, he uses a term called focal practices, and it says that's what we need to do. Focal practices are kind of meaningful occasions, and I find his definition of those meaningful occasions very interesting. It has 4 criteria. One is that there is that I feel, so it's all about my experience, of course, because meaning has to do with how I experience things. So one thing is that I feel that there's no other place I want to be. So I know when I'm really doing something focal, when I'm in the moment, when I'm not thinking about, oh, I'm here in this room, but actually I want to be in the restaurant, or actually I want to be in my office, or something like that. So if I have a feeling this is a place I want to be, then that's focal. The social aspect also, there's no one I would rather be with. It's also really beautiful, right? So if you have that experience, you're somewhere and you feel like, you know, now I really want to be with these people. That's again very focal. Third criterion, there's nothing I'd rather be doing. So in terms of activities, you don't think like, I'd rather check my email, for example, or I'd rather do sports, or I'd rather go out. So this is something that, again, ties you to the moment. And then the fourth criterion that you can ask yourself if you're in a practice, whether it's focal or not, is like, do I want to remember this? So if you say like, I will remember this is a great time. So I think for me, this kind of criteria for Borgman, it's a definition of focal practices. For me here, I use it to say like, well, these are good times, right? These are good times if you have the feeling that there's no other place you want to be, if you don't want to be with other people at that moment, and if there's nothing you'd rather be doing, and so on. So what kind of occasions and practices are these? Well, Borgman himself gives the examples of a campfire and a music concert. I think that it's possible to also do this in a different way. So you can, I mean, it's true, these are very nice activities, and they can become very focal. But I think we don't necessarily have to go back to the past technologies. We can also listen to contemporary music, for example, and we can use other technologies than campfires. What is important is that we create techno performances, so with technology. Technology is not a problem, right? A fire is a kind of technology. Technology is not a problem, but we have to think what kind of techno performances can we create so that kairos can emerge. I don't have to explain to you because you know Greek better than I do, but I learned that it means originally something like right moment, the right time. And yeah, so I think that we can be open to the fact that all kind of technologies can give us these focal moments. But we have to think about how to configure these moments. We have to think about what kind of technologies that are, and I don't immediately have the answer to it, but of course these more older technologies and older practices can inspire us, like the campfire, maybe also some rituals even from indigenous people. So I think there's far too little exploration there. What I found when I was thinking about like what's a good time, then I also found this kind of references to older practices. Here a religious practice where people pray on the fields, and yeah, it's interesting to think about that, what it means for finding common time and finding focal time, right? Because these people were in the moment, one could presuppose this. And yeah, it's interesting because it offers a different view of temporality than, say, the temporality that I have when I do my emails, right? It's like as if the world stands still suddenly. Interesting, however, to make my point to say like, well, but these were also already techno performances, because there was actually clocks, a bell from the church in that case, that gave a signal that people would pray, right? So that I find it interesting, not because I'm interested in that particular practice or religious practices, but because I think that it shows that with technology one can still have a focal practice. And so I think we should reject romantic views of the past that think that only in the past we had, you know, that there was a world where things were perfect in terms of relating to time. No, there was, for example, discipline in the monasteries. There was discipline, of course, also in the modern factories and schools before the current ones. And yeah, Manfort and Foucault, for example, show this, that the timetables in monasteries, timetables are also technology. So the question we should ask is not like, do we want technology or not, but rather, what particular technologies do we want or not, and what particular technologies could lead to better times, yeah? And good times together, common times also. and that where common times leads us to the political, because time making is social and political, and it's about so here I connect to political philosophy, because traditional political philosophy seems to always prioritize the metaphor of space. So when we think about democracy, for example, when we think about the ideal political system, we think about maybe the ancient agora, or we think about some other space, but the question for philosophers of political philosophy has been, what common space can we create? And I think that's a good question, there's nothing wrong about it. But what about asking the question, what common time can we create? So I think we need both of these questions. And I think that question about common times is a problem of coexistence. How can we exist together in a good way? And then of course we have to look at the current socio-economic system in which technology plays a very important role. Digital technologies, for example, in STS, Judy Weichmann has shown that digital calendars that we all use play this role of enabling capitalism, and thereby also enabling a particular form of synchronicity. So I use the term synchronicity because we want to find like good time together, so time together synchron, but from Chronos, right? But the question is, of course, what kind of synchronicity is a good one? And so the current form of synchronicity in capitalism is not what we want. Then the question is, what do we want? So what kind of chiropolitics do we then want? So one way to conceptualize is to say that Chronos is more the objective time of modern science and capitalism, and we need to find Kairos, find the right moment. But yeah, how to do that? And yeah, one way is to go beyond Western thinking. Western thinking that has not only tried to erase people from spaces, you know, by saying like, oh, we arrived in this land and it was a terra nullius, it was a sort of a land where no one lived, but of course people lived there. And similarly, I think there's a kind of colonial thinking in terms of time, maybe, you know, that people are also erased from time, that histories have been told, luckily less and less, but histories have been told where certain peoples just didn't figure, right? Didn't have a role. Thinking about a narrative again, making sense, putting events, characters in a narrative structure to make sense, but what happened was that some people were not part of that narrative. And I think against that we can look like when we think about making common times in a different way than the Chronos way, then we could look at indigenous non-Western cultures and look at different ways of relating to time, and therefore also different ways of relating to life, right? And different practices, different ways of seeing the world, the cosmos. And two examples are the Yukno people in Papua New Guinea, where apparently time is seen as a non-linear way, and also very different metaphors are used. Instead of the arrow of time, a metaphor that's in philosophy of science famous, that we have in the West, here they think as time flowing uphill. So the metaphor and also of course the literal landscape is that there's this river flowing down, water flowing down of course, but time in the way they see it would flow uphill to the source. Very unintuitive for us maybe, but interesting to look even even if it's just to show that our way of relating to time is very, very particular and uses very particular metaphors. So we get gain a critical relation to time, and I think this kind of things also help us to gain a critical relation to technology. We can look how other cultures use technology, but also what that means for existence and seeing existence. There's a kind of what I called in the book anthropochronic thinking. Why? Because time in the macro sense has been seen always as a history of humans. But what about other histories? Histories of non-humans, histories that include non-humans. So there's again trying to go beyond what we usually do. So we tell stories about humans. And also then, lastly, what I call in the book contemporalization in analogy to contextualization. So when we contextualize, the metaphor we have in mind is that we have a specific word, for example, and we put it in the context of other words, so we imagine a space of something that is situated in space. But I think we can also situate ourselves in a longer time horizon and time landscape. And then, for example, an interesting thing to look at is geological time. Geological time that suddenly puts us in a very different perspective, one that's much longer. And I read some literature that looks at how, for example, even monuments also can mediate between the contemporary, right, the current time, and these and times from the past, times that also might involve non-humans and narratives about non-humans. For example, Serasinski has written about the Parthenon frieze in that way. I thought it's nice to mention in this particular context, and also to do a kind of contemporalization of this lecture. If it's true that this is also a political question, though, so it was clearly political when I talked about this eraser of people and so on, well, then we can say like it's time for change, right? But when is a time for change, right? And of course, by saying it's time for change, the question is what kind of time? So one reaction to that by Adams, which I found interesting, was to say like we have to occupy time. And he discusses the Occupy movement, but also other ways of resistance against capitalism that try to do something about that. But interestingly, he argues that if we want revolution or if we want to occupy and so on, that this kind of thinking about the thinking of time in that is very much about the present, and he says like, but this is also kind of capitalist way of thinking. So it's still presentist. It's maybe not what we want. Nevertheless, one can say like, but we want to find the right moment for change. We need to get better at timing, maybe. So in playing here, of course, with the metaphor of time, but at the same time that is asking questions like what kind of time we need. And towards technology, that means like, when is the right moment to change technology, to do things differently, and also more constructively, perhaps, can we find new techno performances, new dances with technology that give us a good time and a good common time. Also influenced by Arendt, I say like, well, we need new beginnings indeed, but then one has to ask the question, what are the conditions for that? Beginnings also presupposes again a view of time. So the question is again, what kind of time do we mean? And then what's the role of technology in that? when one calls for change, it's always good to see that already what's happening, how temporalities already shift through technology, through other changes and through political action, for example. So I think for social change we need different techno-performances, but they are already happening, and so that can be on two levels, also relating to the discussion we had about the commons. So there's a macro level of the big political changes that are needed, maybe the more structural changes also, and there's the smaller level of, for example, the techno-performances of people who protest in a particular space at a particular time. And again, the question is, what is it well timed? Yeah, timing is everything. Also think about earlier in the 80s, for example, I think it was 80s or early 90s, when Greenpeace started actions and so on. Timing for protests is very important. So we can do techno-performances that change things and change our times, and yeah, that can be done at various levels, and doesn't always have to take the same form as the form from the past. So it's about seeing also already and recognizing the techno-performances that are there and the political techno-performances that are there. So it's finding techno-performances and also techno-performing new good times and common times within this changing context that I started with: climate change, economic change, micro-bacterial change maybe. So there are all these changes, and I think so this can be not only seen, conceptualized with metaphors of space, but also with time, and taking into account this important role of technology in it. I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, Mark, for this rich and very thought-provoking presentation. To my understanding, there are two conceptual pillars in your presentation that comes from the Greek, actually. It's chronos and kairos. I mean, in a certain sense, what you are saying against classical political philosophy is that politics is not a game that is played at the macro level, it's played on micro level. That is, at the level of personal temporality and speciality, space and time of human person. Okay, so if there are changes to be made, and if there are critical changes, we need to start from this micro level. Most of the times when we talk about politics, we're talking about public space and the dichotomy between the public and the private. But here perhaps the way digital technologies change our experience of time should make us start the whole process by talking about new temporal experiences that are experience of common times. Okay, so for me, this idea of that I found in your book of chiropolitics and political change that doesn't come from a new perception of common space, public space, but from our temporal existence, and the way, let's say, to get over presentism, what you're saying as presentism, the fact that these presentisms make time rigid and makes it slip between our fingers. This is an existential question, but it's at the same time a political question. So I open discussion to the floor, and let's see. So please,
Yeah. So first, I'd love to thank you for the good times you provided here. It was really an intriguing talk, and I was wondering when you were talking about Kairos, when we think about these new dances of technology you were talking about that might help us to redefine this common time, I mean, especially regarding technological thinking and artificial intelligence and all other things we've been discussing here, do you think it is possible to generate this common time and common space and finding Kairos itself in a fully desubjectivized way, like removing the subject kind of in a way and relying only on the technological side of things?
Yeah, so for me the subject is always involved and emerges from it, right? So I think it's not possible even to annihilate the subject, even if theoretically some people try to do that by describing things in a very different way than I've done. The subject is there, the subject is part of the process and emerges as it goes along and changes also. So for me the technology is, as object, so to speak, always related to the subject also. And when we analyze that, then we automatically have to, then we have to talk about also all these things like narration, meaning making, interpretation, and all kind of also technical terms from phenomenology can be used.
Very interesting. So you mentioned that technologies can affect the way we perceive time and they can make us anxious and so on. I was thinking that another aspect of technologies, especially digital technologies, is that they steal our attention away, and so we're not present into them. And many of them are designed to do precisely this with the kind of notifications that we receive. And that would be another aspect of our experience, like it's time, space, and then it's our attention, because without it we're no one. I was wondering whether you have to say something about that.
Yeah, so you mean that they are on purpose designed for distracting us?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Doesn't mean that they are on purpose designed, like to do that as a sort of evil thing or something. They will be on purpose be designed to put our attention, for example, in a particular game, or our attention in scrolling and so on. But of course, the effect of it is that we lose ourselves there. It can be sometimes that we want that experience, but the point is that the technology, apart from whatever we want, will push us gently, nudge us in a certain direction, and the direction it pushes us is always more and more and more. It wants me to keep scrolling, it wants me to keep being immersed, regardless of all the sort of practical rationality that many philosophers talk about. It undercuts all that. It's no longer the picture of me as this autonomous being with reason and so on. It directly plays with me, in a way that uses the technology and also empirical psychology to manipulate my behavior.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. That was really inspiring. I was. Is it on? Well,
you don't need it.
I don't need it. I don't really think I need it.
Yeah,
so once again, for the third time, thank you so much. I have a question on your notion of the process. And maybe there are two questions, because you said technology as a process or technology as something that emerges from a process. My first question is it the same? Like, is it the same? Is it the same and how is it linked to maybe different understanding of time, even if it's not the same, because the Simondonian crystallization or concretization of something has a movement of process, but also some knotting, like crystallizing, concretizing, and becoming a process again. So I see it like this. It's kind of a linear still, but like becoming these pulsating moments. I'm very interested in this understanding what happens to the subject there, because they kind of separate again at some point a little bit, like there is the duality in the becoming, but if it's a process, if technology as a process, maybe there is no duality at all. So I would really like to hear more about that, because I'm just thinking with and trying to grasp if it's also maybe not even a finished or is there a finished thesis that you have on this technology as a process or technology as something emerging from a process?
Yeah, I think that the way I would now put that, but it's always thinking in process. So I don't, this was not finished enough, you could say, and it doesn't matter if it's finished or not. The way I think about it now is that there are two levels or something. So technology changes if we think of it, if we imagine it as a kind of object that's changing, then let's say not object that's changing, but let's say process. So then we can, for example, take into account maintenance, decay, and all kind of things that happen. Also, if we look at it as a process, we can look then at the interactions, and that brings us more to sort of bigger process, where these material things are included, but also the humans are included. And they participate in the process, but then they do not participate in the process like a thing that stays the same, but they, in the process, will change. So in that sense, emerge from the process. But they never, if we look at process in a wider sense, then they never go out of the process. So this sentence "emerge from" is a little bit confusing there, because it stays within a process. Yeah. Just as some people said in the past, like we cannot get out of text. In a sense, we cannot get out of process.
Thanks for the nice presentation. I have actually two questions. The one is related to Gilles Deleuze and the distinction between aeon and chronos in the logic of sense. And I was wondering if you relate in a way to that distinction you mentioned between chaos and chronos. And the second one that is quite unrelated to the first is, and nowadays there is also a tendency, especially in exhibitions and artwork, around immersive reality and augmented reality. And there I imagine that the sense of time is very different. So I was wondering if you think that your problematic could be also related to this. Because it doesn't work. There are exhibition spaces today that use augmented reality, and there is a fusion between virtual reality and physical. And there the sense of time is very strange. So I imagine that these boundaries are a good fertile terrain for your problematic. And I was wondering if you think so. Maybe.
So virtual reality is interesting that you mention it. Yeah. I would normally, like most people, analyze virtual reality using metaphors of space, because it's so obvious. But yeah, it might be nice to look at what it means for time. I mean, we already have, like, even, doesn't have to be virtual reality, but if you have different kind of mediations, like for example, a Zoom meeting already has a different kind of temporality than meeting in person, perhaps. Yeah, one would need to analyze specific media and environments and see what kind of time is there. In both cases, there will be always a kind of chronos that tries to guide us or tries to frame the experience. Like a conference has a program with a sort of chronological order. And in virtual reality, there could be similar things that try to bring us back to that time, but yeah, there could be other ways of mediation that make us being immersed in a particular moment or something. For me, it's we would have to compare also with, like, what if it's not virtual reality, and what kind of devices and environments are here, for example, and how do they influence our time, also not in virtual reality, and one can compare. And so I think one needs to then discuss the specific features. Like if you would say that you had some experience in VR that was very different, and one would need to make that explicit, what exactly. But I think I know in what kind of direction you go, because you put on this headset, and it's interesting to see how people having this headset are completely immersed, and other people around them, they have very different experiences, of course, and I guess also a different experience of time. Because a person will just say like, oh, this didn't look long, while the person waiting for the other person to finish the VR, and this kind of things. So yeah, that's also, again, like for me, there is also this social element. What's the relation between these two people and so on, and what do I encounter in this virtual world that gives me what kind of experience? So we'll have to analyze that properly.
Anthony?
Yeah, thank you also from my side for this very rich talk. I think I have like 5 questions, but I will try to deduce it to one. And it popped up in my head when you noted the critique on post-phenomenology, right? That the typical focus on artifacts, but also that they do not take temporality into account in their classical schemes. Now, I've been thinking of how we can change that and why that is. And I find it very strange that phenomenologists that post-phenomenology draws from, so Husserl, Heidegger, they explicitly prioritize temporality over spatial phenomenal appearances.
Like being in time.
Yeah, right. And Donaidi and Verbeek just completely leave that behind somehow. So maybe there's something we can work with. But then, of course, I came to Arendt, as always. And the interesting thing I find in Arendt is that she reintroduces space as a category that we should think perhaps together with temporality. And my question is coming, I promise. So I do agree that we need to look into common time besides common space, but do you have any thoughts on the relationship or the relationality between time and space? And I've been particularly thinking of the context of algorithms, because I think in that context specifically, the spatiality of the algorithm is, you can't detach it from the temporality of the algorithm, because it is both a sort of, it has an in-between character. An algorithm allows me to move from a here to a there, but this movement takes time, and this mediates my experiences and frustrations of using platforms. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thanks for a very good question. I think these two are related, just like in talking about like the time and space of physics, there is this relation, right? I think also in the experience of time and space for us, there is this relation. For example, if I think about a campfire, so I want to find good times, but that will also involve the question where to go for having these good times, right? So and where to go, then the question will be when do we go? Or for example, if you're like with a group of people and you want to do something, so it's as simple as that, and it also as potentially complicated like that. But yeah, how they exactly hang together, I don't know, but it looks like they seem to go together. Yeah.
While you were speaking, I was thinking that Keros has another element from the point of view of the subject or a company or another entity that trying to, in a sense, use time. That we're trying to, let's say, manipulate circumstances for our benefit. And today's technologies, for example, applications, are services and products meant for the mass public. Therefore, there are different experiences of the users. So there is it's just a thought, and I was your opinion, your thought about that. The common time between different users, but at the same time the common time between the users and maybe the service or the company to be achieved. It's from both sides a struggle for the manipulation of time and therefore of the experiences. So maybe there is to be a balance on that, in a sense. I don't know if you have thought about it.
Yeah, I think maybe you're suggesting that a user is not completely passive, right, and can try to influence time. So, but at the same time, of course, first of all, by calling the subject a user here, you already frame it in the way that the company will frame the subject or person. So, but yeah, there will be, so even if we try to shape our own experience, I think it's always going to be difficult. We have to sort of push back because the technology and the company through the technology will push a particular kind of behavior. And if we don't want to do that, we need to be very strong, we need to be self-disciplined. So, yeah, we for this kind of sort of hacking of the technology, not in the technical sense necessarily, but in the sense of that we do it differently, yeah, it requires a sort of ascesis, right? A sort of self-discipline and control, but yeah, in a way that doesn't let the company and technology push us that way.
Professor Finberg, can you hear me?
Yes, I am just barely hearing you.
Okay, we can hear you too. We can hear you. You can't see us, but we can see you and we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, so we will begin.
How do I introduce my slides?
I will introduce you to the audience along with Mr. Manuel Spartiniotis, and then you can begin. So, first of all, thank you for being here in this conference, for presenting, and for accepting our invitation. Professor Andrew Finberg holds the Canada Research Chair in the Philosophy of Technology in the Simon Fraser University of Vancouver, Canada. And he has introduced the concept of critical theory of technology, initially in his 1991 book, Critical Theory of Technology, and then in a series of books, in 1995, The Alternative Modernity, the technical term in philosophy and social theory and social research, and in 1999, The Question of Technology, and in 2002, Transforming Technology, A Critical Theory Revisited. So, Professor Manuel Kotiniotis is going to say a few words too, and then we can begin.
Yanni, I think Professor Finberg needs help to introduce his slides.
Okay,
Is that right?
yes, of course, I will make Professor Finberg presenter.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
Of course, I could add a lot about Professor Finberg, and I think he's going to share with us his very refreshing ideas about philosophy of technology. I will just say that we are proud that we at last have in Greek one book by Professor Finberg, Between Reason and Experience, translated by Yannis. And we also have included some papers by Professor Finberg in a recent anthology about the empirical turn in philosophy of technology. So we are eager to hear him and discuss with him.
Professor, you can share your screen. There is a button, share screen, up to your right, in the upper right corner.
I press to choose what you want to share. What does that mean?
Yeah.
If you have opened a lot of windows and applications, it needs you to give the access to which one of these you want to share with us. So you have to press the PowerPoint if it is such a presentation.
Present. Select the tab to share. I don't understand. It doesn't offer me the possibility of. It just shows me Chrome tabs. I mean, oh, I see. Here we go. It's awfully slow.
It should work. Maybe if you shut down your presentation and open it again, maybe then it will reveal it.
It was very difficult to get it to open up the first time, so I'm afraid that surely that's okay. Now, is this? Can you see what I see?
Yes, yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
You can begin. Thank you.
I'm not quite ready. All right. So I'm going to give a talk about the internet. I want to end up by thinking how we can reform it and make it a better system for us rather than for the large corporations that now control it. But in order to get there, we need to understand it, and that seems to be quite difficult. It's a very complex and strange kind of animal. So this is primarily a methodological talk about how to understand this unusual system. The complexity of the internet is such that everything we do seems to have consequences you didn't intend. Every move you make connects to a counter move of some sort. So, for example, you want to get some music, the next thing you know, you're bombarded with ads. You debate politics with other people, and suddenly you're getting propaganda from right-wing crazies. human purposes on the one hand, commerce and propaganda on the other, and they coexist in some miserable combination. We know, of course, which is the dominant actor, and that's the large corporations and the governments and the political agents who try to control us. And the question is, can we change that? So I'm going to deal here with methods, because I think methods are necessary to understand this very complicated system. I'll mention three methods here. On the one hand, actor network theory, ANT, it's called in the business, and it has a kind of operationalist approach to understanding networks. And then I'm going to move on to the conception of the world that is developed by Husserl and Heidegger. And finally, Gilbert Simondon's concepts of individuation and concretization, which enable us to develop a co-construction theory of the method. So the issue here is basically how to understand the different layers of explanation and of the reality of the network that we face in this strange world of the internet. So first, talk about ANT. This is a theory developed by Bruno Latour and Michel Calon in France, I think in the 1980s. The basic idea is that everything in the world belongs to networks of one sort or another. Networks operate through enrollment in of entities. Entities are enrolled in the service of a program of some sort, which brings them together. So, for example, the internet contains various programs like, say, Facebook, which brings together human beings in a certain way, but only in a certain way. The enrollments involve simplifications. So in Facebook, for example, you are present in some aspects of your being, but not all. Many others are left out. And this generally is the way in which networks function. Furthermore, they function through associations and translations between the different nodes that are enrolled in the networks. Now, I can't do a whole presentation of actor network theory, but here just one very basic aspect needs to be discussed, and that is the notion of agency. This is the originality of the theory of Latour and Calon. The idea here is that what we think of as differently as symbolic or causal links in our world all add up in the end to what they call agency, the forms of agency. So they try and put together all the different ways in which things interact in a single concept. This notion of agency makes sense. Everything, it's true, everything in the world has some kind of action on everything, on other things around it. The fact that some of those interactions take the form of causal relations. You drop a glass and it breaks, that's a causal interaction. Other things have a symbolic character. You give a talk like this one, that's a symbolic action. So the differences, though, can be blurred in the concept of agency. This, I think, originally comes from a literary model, where, in fact, say, in a novel or a film, people and things have agency in the same kind of way. I guess I shouldn't go into this too much. We'll end up talking about Latour rather than the internet. So if we take this notion of networks based on programs to the internet, we'll see that the internet consists of a kind of assemblage of many features, and they are organized around three main programs. The consumption program, which concerns the sale of goods, the communication program, which concerns human interactions, and what I will call a cyber politics program, which is the ways in which political actors engage. I'm not here talking about the kind of deliberations that occur when people interact in regular conversation, but rather organized cyber politics developed by governments, by political actors of one sort or another, the Koch brothers and others. And these cyber political activities constitute a third program. Now the programs have overlapping functions. This is what makes the complexity of the internet so difficult to conceive. For example, the internet can store documents of one sort or another. It can store information. In the consumption program, storage is useful for presenting consumers with goods. When every time you look at eBay, you're seeing things that have been stored for your collection. Anonymity also is a function that is performed across all three programs. Anonymity is helpful for all sorts of activities on the internet, especially those that you'd like to keep secret. So these different storage and anonymity are my two examples then of overlapping functions. There are many others. They have complementarity because they function in different ways in each program. For example, the storage program, as I said, is useful for consumption, but it's also useful for communication. You couldn't have a communicative interaction on the internet without some kind of backup of who you are, what you've done in the past, what kind of information you want to have shared with other people. All of this involves storage, and similarly with anonymity, it's useful for different purposes. For example, for viewing pornographic images or for engaging in illegal or dubious activities. These are communicative interactions. So the fact that the functions can be used for different political purposes is important, and there can be sort of thresholds of conflict between them where things get out of hand. For example, if the consumption function becomes the use of storage for consumption overtakes every other function in the system, then you get problems. I remember there was once a time when Facebook wanted to have all of your purchases show up among your friends. That didn't work. There was a huge outcry. They had to drop that idea because what happened there was that the storage function for consumption was interfering with the communication function and essentially made communication impossible. Okay, so these three programs all operate and they all have these overlapping functions, but there is a definite dominance. And that dominance is, of course, the dominance of the big companies, Google, Facebook, and so on that run most of the services on the web. This is really the meaning of Web 2.0. Before, there was an internet that was largely dominated by human communication. Now we have an internet that's dominated by corporate actors. So let's see how we can adapt Ant to the internet. So there's an implied concept in the way in which Ant develops its networks. I haven't read all of Ant, so perhaps this is there somewhere, but I haven't seen it. Programs, I would argue, construct a system. I think there's a mistake here in my, this is the wrong, well, I'll work with it. Programs construct a wider system, and that system consists of interacting elements, as we said earlier. But the systems that the programs construct belong to a still wider network, and that network engages many elements that were not perhaps intended by the originators of the system. So you can have unintended consequences of initiating a program. Now we know about this, of course, in relation to the environment. It's obvious. A company builds a system of some sort. It has intentions that are that control its actions in that system, but then the system that it's built has consequences for people that didn't know were involved. For example, the smoke coming from its smokestacks just damage the laundry of the people in the neighborhood. They get involved in, they are experiencing the unintended consequences of the program, and they may get involved by say, pursuing a lawsuit against the company. The same thing happens on the internet, and where attempts to organize activities produce consequences that were not intended. And we see this all the time in hacking, for example, where a system is hacked and made to do things that were not intended by its organizers. Latour, in one early work, calls this an anti-program. So there are programs in the network that create systems within the network, and then there are the anti-programs of people who are engaged in the network, but were not supposed to be part of the system. Actually, in the case of the internet, we should really call it an altered program, because there are lots of things that happen that don't actually have an anti-form. They're not actually the opposite, or an attempt to inhibit or damage the original program, but simply tack on and do their own thing, using elements of the program for their own purposes. Well, I've devised a little theory about this, which is not in Latour as far as I know. SDS, Science and Technology Studies, started out with the notion of symmetry of winners and losers in scientific controversies. They wanted to show that the winners and losers are equally, need to be equally evaluated. It's not that the winners are smart and the losers are dumb. They developed this concept of symmetry then for scientific controversy, but Latour introduced it for what he called the relation of humans and non-humans. This is where his theory of agency comes in. Humans and non-humans are symmetrical in the sense that they both have agency and cause things to happen in the network. So you put a roof on your house and to keep out the rain, but it rusts, and then the rain can get in. That's the anti program of your roof program. And it's a non-human doing things that you as a human are doing, because both of you have agency. This is from the tools theory. I add then the third symmetry, the symmetry of program and anti-program. When we evaluate the relations of the programs and anti-programs on the internet, we should view them as symmetrical in the sense that they're equally significant. You can't simply say that one is the right way to do things and the other the wrong way. Hacking and the original system on which it hacks should be treated equally as symmetrically engaged. Okay, so much for Ant. What we see from this initial study of Ant is that the internet is not one thing. Many debates are reductive because they treat the internet as one thing and say they take its dominant character as its essence. But in fact, as we've seen, three programs coexist in the system and their interactions determine the internet. So we need to disaggregate the internet and treat it as a complex phenomenon. Now, so far, Ant takes us this far, but there are limitations of Ant. Because of its concept of agency, it has an operational aspect. It doesn't really treat meaning as something significant. Meaning and intentions have no special significance for Ant because they're simply other forms of agency. The humans in the non-human and human symmetry need a different approach. We need to talk about the humans and their intentions differently from the way in which we talk about causal interactions. And this is something which Ant tries not to do, but which I think is essential for understanding the internet. We need to understand the worlds of meaning that are created by human beings. Here we go again. This is the wrong set of slides, but we had a lot of trouble getting into the system. I ended up with this set of slides. I don't know how exactly. It doesn't really matter because it's still, I can work around. And here I intended to talk about some more peripheral things, but we'll just leave them out and talk about how perception is organized according to phenomenology. Phenomenology is a philosophical theory that offers a method for understanding how we engage with the world through our relationship to meanings. We interact with the world not directly through, not simply through causal interactions, but through the meanings of the things that we engage with. Everything that we perceive has a meaning, and that's really what enables us to understand what we're doing and to make sense of the world around us. Now, there's a parallel here between this idea in phenomenology and the notion of program and system. We are, in a sense, always engaged in a program in relation to the world around us, the program being our own concerns, which allows us to focus on the things that matter and to ignore the things that don't or that are out of our ken. So in a sense, phenomenology is already going to help us understand the asymmetry, which Ant refuses to respect, between the program, our program, as actors in the world, and the things that we interact with. Well, Heidegger developed all this in a concept he called being in the world, and he gave the example of a carpenter whose world consists of a lot of objects that are useful for his activities. And these objects interact with him, or rather he interacts with them, and they together form a sort of, they form a context within which he lives. So Heidegger calls this a system of functional references. Each piece of, for example, a hammer and a nail are related not just causally as things that you might bump against, but also through their function. The hammer and nail belong together. And so all the things in the world fit together through different systems of reference. Now, programs enact meanings as well as simply organizing networks. And we can see this in the case, say again, take the case of storage, which I mentioned earlier. Storage is has a special meaning for people in human interactions on the network. Storage involves temporality. It enables a group of people to engage across time because they can get access to their earlier interactions, and it involves identity because storage enables people to have a consistent identity across time. And this, of course, is quite different because this is all intentional. It all involves human intentions as opposed to storage as data, which is simply deposited in a computer somewhere and can be processed by a program. So in this sense, then we have coexistence of programs, but the programs are radically different. On the one hand, they're the human programs. On the other hand, programs that are purely causal. And Facebook gives you the example of this. On the one hand, everything we say on Facebook involves us with other human beings through our intentions. On the other hand, everything we say on Facebook ends up in a data bank somewhere for use in designing the advertisements that reach us. So again, we have thresholds, the possibility of an excess of one or the other of these two very different ways of organizing the internet, with the potential for breakdown if things get too far out of hand on one side or the other. Now I want to move from this concept of internet worlds in the phenomenological sense to Simondon and co-construction. Why? Because the concept of world in phenomenology lacks dynamism. It doesn't really give you any way of understanding the development. Gilbert Simondon, a French philosopher of technology, invented some concepts that are very useful for understanding the dynamism of the internet. And there are two concepts here that I'm going to briefly mention. One is individuation, and the other is concretization. So individuation is a concept that Simondon introduced to talk about his relational concept of being. Simondon thinks that everything is related in one way or another to something else. There's nothing that simply stands alone by itself. He called this, and this is a dynamic system of ontogenesis. He introduced some notions, some fairly complex notions we're talking about this. The basic idea is that things emerge out of something, what he calls the pre-individual, that enables them to form. And he gives the example of crystallization in a solution. This example is easy to understand, but it's a little bit deceptive. But anyway, here's his example. imagine a saturated solution. It's a liquid, and at some point, something falls into it, say a little, an additional crystal. It's a crystal of some sort, or a piece of paper, or something. Anything can cause it to, if it's super saturated, to crystallize. So then all the material in the solution falls out and forms crystals at the bottom. And so you have, from what was a single object, the supersaturated solution, you end up with two objects, crystals and water. And this, for Simondon, is a kind of, what would you say, it's a kind of a model of how things emerge in the world. And you can see how this could make sense for human beings. Human beings individuate in this, in Simondon's sense, through the social relations and the technologies that enable them to become what they are. And they do so through interactions, not simply alone, but always in interaction with other human beings and with the technologies that bring them together. In science and technology studies, something similar is called co-construction. We as humans are co-constructed. We're not simply constructed, for example, out of our DNA. We're co-constructed because we also belong to a world in which other human beings play an essential role in our own construction. So if we look at the internet in terms of this notion of co-construction, and see how roles and functions emerge together. So for example, purchasing. You as a purchaser are engaged with the system, the purchasing system. All those prompts that enable you to use your credit card. There are two things here that are necessarily interrelated. There's no purchasing without the purchasing system. There's no consumers without the thing to be consumed. So there's always these correlations in all of our interactions on the internet. Virtual worlds are created around correlations of one sort or another. But the internet is not simply a system of correlations. It's also a kind of free space in which the particular roles we play can be exceeded by our invention of further activities, further roles that were perhaps not originally conceived by the designer of the program that we're engaged in. So interactions emerge within the internet, and that is in fact one of the big dynamics of the internet. It has been the emergence of new roles, new functions, and new correlations. So an example of hacking is maybe the original case when the ARPANET was being built in the 1960s. An engineer at the company that was designing it thought that since they were originally they were supposed to simply send files back and forth. That was the original idea of the internet. What was then called the ARPANET. But this engineer thought, well, if we can send files, we could also send messages. And he figured out a way to do that. And so he transformed one set of interactions and correlations, that between the owner and the recipient of a file, into something very different. The sender and the receiver of a human communication. Okay, then there's a second concept of Simondon, which is useful for talking about the internet, and that's the notion of concretization. By concretization, Simondon meant the joining together of several functions in a single structure. So this is part of his philosophy of technology. He gives the example of the air-cooled engine. This is all being, remember, Simondon was writing this in the 1950s, so there examples from the kind of technologies that were available then. And an air-cooled engine is a good example of concretization because in the case of an air-cooled engine, the casing of the engine performs the function of cooling the engine. You don't need an extra radiator, which would be a separate function. Instead, you have the function of cooling and the function of operating the engine combined through designing an engine casing that radiates heat. So this is an example of concretization. It's a concept of progressive development because Simondon thought that this was in fact how the development of a line of technology progressed. It was improved at each stage through additional concretizations that simplified its operations and made them more efficient. So there are concretizations on the internet. This, in fact, is what it means that there are coexistence of programs. Again, think about storage. When the examples that I gave of the use of storage for human purposes and for data collection, that's an example of concretization, just exactly like the engine, the cooling of the engine that Simondon used as his model. Okay, so let's talk about how the internet concretizes. There's a key concretization that underlies everything that's happened in recent years on the internet. And this is the development by Google at first and then later Facebook and other programs on the internet of the advertising business. Google concretized information in ads. Once people sought information, that could be transformed into a prompt for advertising. Facebook applies it to online community. Everything you say on Facebook can be used to send you ads. And so this is the key concretization that has transformed the internet from its original configuration into now something organized by big business. I want to focus here on online community because that is really the key factor in our understanding of our own use of the internet. And it is an original feature of the internet that we need to understand better if we're going to escape from the dominance of the advertising business and companies that operate it. So think about an online community here as a concretization. Electronic mediation of human interaction started with the telephone. That's a one-on-one type of system. It then developed through radio and television with broadcasting, which is a one-to-many type of system. And now, finally, with computer networks, we have many-to-many systems, and that is what we mean by online community, the sort of thing that we almost all of us are engaged in part of the day. But that's an original use of electronic mediation. Before, it was always necessary, if people wanted to engage in many-to-many communications, that they be in the same place. What the internet has done is to concretize mail, a system used for communication across distances, and filing, the system used to enable face-to-face groups to have a history. What the internet has done is to reverse the relation. Now, when you engage, say, on Facebook with other people, the filing takes place in the data storage systems of Facebook, and you don't have, in a sense, you are engaged in sending mail every time you put a comment on the system, and that mail goes directly to the filing system that you have access to. So you're no longer forced to be face to face, because you can now, let's say you've concretized mail and filing. They've now come together in a single system in which you engage with other people at a distance through the file. So we can think of online community as a system for individuation through it. A lot of things have changed about social life. Public and private lose their boundaries. Politics develops around project groups that would formerly not have been able to interact. Because they were simply too far apart. Think of the all the groups that talk about their illnesses. There are a lot of these groups on the internet where people talk about their medical problems. They could not have done so before. Now they can, because of the nature of the system. And then there are also changes in the way leisure and fantasy operate. So all of these are forms of individuation that have come about through the internet. And it has public consequences. There are mediations, political groups, and actions of all sorts are now possible through the mediation of the internet, where formerly you would have to get people together, and that was often either impossible or difficult. Now it's easy. And there's a kind of self-consciousness about the internet. Technical publics form where formerly they might not have. People interact now where, there are, for example, as I gave the example earlier of these medical groups, there are other groups. Local people in the town might have complaints. They can now easily interact and become conscious of themselves as members of the community with a certain influence, possibility of influence on the community. So we have then tremendous changes in the public that have occurred as a result of the internet. And in the early stages, this resulted in some major political struggles of a progressive nature that were organized by ordinary people around their communities or around their concerns. So, for example, there's a famous Battle of Seattle at the I can't remember the dates, but it was a long time ago. The Zapatistas, Occupy, a whole series of different movements that were organized through the internet and had consequences for the public sphere. And that was in the early stage before the companies managed to reorganize the internet. But they did succeed. This is their counter move, and their counter move results from the metastability of the internet, the fact that it can be individuated in many different forms. And all of this came about through what is called the network effect, the fact that the value of a network depends on the number of nodes. So if there's a bar in your neighborhood where lots of people like to go, it becomes eventually the place where everyone has to go, simply because everyone goes there. The network effect operates to make competition difficult on the internet, because a company like Facebook that can accumulate the largest number of nodes, let's say of people, makes it difficult for anyone to find value in a smaller network, and everyone gradually accumulates toward the single largest network. So you could think of online community which emerges as a result of the speck of dust that causes the solution to precipitate. In this case, what happened was once these large numbers of people were available to a corporation, it was able to data mine their data and commercialize as a result. So what you ended up with was gradually a system in which huge fluxes of data were collected from online communities and then sent back to the individuals through commerce. And this resulted, as a result of the network effect and the ability of the companies to service the huge numbers of individuals in a kind of centralization. This is a strange phenomenon. The original idea of ARPANET and then eventually the internet, as it came to be known, was based on a protocol called TCP/IP, the function of which was to enable nodes to enter the network without much complication. You just needed a small program to attach your node to the network. We all have it on our computer. So this meant a decentralized system in which everybody could join the network through this program without having to go through some central control. So it's very different from the original forms of computer networking that all involved central control of some sort. So the original idea of the internet was that there would be no centralization. There would be no center that controlled everything. It would all emerge out of the interactions of the individual nodes. But now the network has been centralized because its human element, the people, are all bound up with central controls of companies like Facebook. So we have, in a way, a return, the counter move here, the cascading consequence of the network effect and online community has been the return of something very much like broadcasting and its commercialism. And as a result, state actors and their propaganda and business community propaganda have now taken over large swaths of the internet. And this is one of the factors leading to populism, the development of populism. At first, the internet, for 20 years at least, was a public space, a kind of anti-television. But now it has been parasited by the right, and this has, of course, several causes. The rise of the extreme right is not simply due to the internet, but it's one of the features that the right has been able to use. The technology has facilitated the changes. The result is we now have data mining, trolls, bots, malware, all sorts of nastiness, anonymity, bullying, scapegoating, all the kinds of terrible things that make the internet a dangerous space, and organized propaganda, which can be traced back to a small number of actors operating with ill intentions. So how would we reverse the tide? How would we get back to the internet that we desire? Somehow we need to change the dominance from private, back from public to private. And I'm going to list here some of the things that would make a difference. we need protection from cyber politics. And that means that I think the key element here would be simply to make it illegal, impossible to send out political advertising without there being a clear evidence of who the sponsor is. We do this on television, and it seems to work. When you see an ad, it's a political ad is always some reference to the group that designed it, and that enables us to make a kind of ad hominem calculation about whether it makes sense or not, whether we approve of it or not. We need the same kind of protection from politics on the internet. So far that has not happened. People design whole programs of anti-vax propaganda, lies about political enemies and so on. And they get to insert this, or could even be the Russians engaging our political system. They get to insert this into the system without anyone having the possibility of gauging the reliability of the source. We need to be able to have this sort of ad hominem function become part of the way in which the internet operates. Secondly, I think that the sale of personal data simply has to be outlawed. The whole system of online advertising has to be outlawed. Now there are, of course, uses of personal data that we may enjoy. It's nice, for example, to get information about music we might like, and that's also based on personal data. Recommendation systems are useful. But we need to somehow disconnect them from commercialism, and also, I think, make them multiple in character, so that we can design our own system of recommendation, and not simply be controlled by people who have not necessarily interest in our well-being. Espionage is a big problem, not of course so much in the United States or Europe or Japan, in the rich countries, but in the countries that have dictatorships, espionage is used in order to track down and arrest political enemies. I think the whole system of espionage there should be a kind of protection against everything being known. That used to be the case. I remember in the mid-19th century when the British Post was used to track the mail of Mazzini. There was a scandal over this, and in the Parliament, one of the deputies complained. He said, "Gentlemen, do not read the mail of other gentlemen." So there was a time when the idea of looking at everybody's interactions, everybody's mail, was considered a scandal. We need to get back to that. And then I think the internet monopolies need to be broken up. I know this sounds utopian, but after all, AT&T was broken up, Standard Oil was broken up, and in each case, the underlying systems that they controlled were preserved. Simply, the monopoly was forced to share with others. And we need a similar kind of breakup of the internet monopolies. The network effect does not necessarily have to be capitalized by corporations. After all, we can, the telephone companies are now international. We can communicate all over the world through the telephone. There's a network effect that's very useful for us, but it does not correspond to a capitalization of the system by a single monopoly. So we need to have a similar breakup of the internet monopolies. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned here, which is important, is the sharing economy, which has resulted in Airbnb and other similar operations that enable people to work together, Uber and so on. These operations could be organized cooperatively. The means are there. The internet itself is the means through which a sharing economy could be organized. In a sense, you could say Wikipedia is an example. But in order for this to work, you'd need some sort of agent at the top helping to design and operate it. And so government should be doing this rather than private corporations. And then finally, we need a decentralized system of social networking that would again have the virtues of the original TCP/IP protocol operating on the system. So these are the ways in which we can reverse the tide and move from corporate dominance to public dominance in organizing the internet. It involves removing some of the concretizations that made possible private control of the internet in order to return the internet to the human beings who use it. So I'm going to stop there. I want to show you finally my latest book. I also have here a web page and a YouTube channel which you can look at if you want to go further with this. The book is about Herbert Marcuse's philosophy, and it's relevant to what we've just been talking about, although it's not exactly about the internet. He was not really part of that world. He was a little too early for that. But the book does engage with the questions of public and private science and experience that I've been using here to talk about the internet. So that's the end of my talk. Let's see if there's comments. Notice that I finished and say something.
Professor, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I hear you.
Thank you for this excellent presentation of the state of affairs regarding the internet and the potential for a tide reversal. I would like to invite anyone from the audience if you have any questions about Professor Finberg. Anyone? Okay. So yes, of course. If you wish to come here.
Professor Finberg, thank you very much for your talk. I come from a completely different background as I am involved in science and technology mostly, so a completely different background with you. But my question regarding the internet and how we can reverse the situation is probably very simple. What if the service of the internet was completely free to the public and we had free access to the internet? I mean, would that, to your knowledge, change anything about the status of the internet and how it works and how it affects the society in essence?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, because we do have free access to the internet.
But we pay for the access to the corporations in order to have access to the internet in essence.
Oh, I see. Well, obviously,
if it was a public service, for example, or
yeah, we pay in the sense that they get advertising revenue from our participation. And of course that could be handled by the government, just as in many countries, the television network is run by the government. I mean, there are, of course, dangers in that too, but those dangers, I think, are the things you can deal with, whereas you can't deal with commercialization because that's the name of the game. So, I think, yes, of course, the internet can be operated as a public service, and that would be a key element because it has to be revenue has to come from somewhere, and if it doesn't come from corporations and advertising, well, there's two solutions. One is subscription services, and the other is government, public government, a grant from the government, as for example with the BBC in England.
Thank you very much. Hello, Professor. You said that the internet is mainly a part of three programs, the one for consumption, the other one for communication, and the third one, I think that it was cyber politics, yeah. But beyond what we know as internet, when we interact in a platform, there is the issue of infrastructure, of data storage, of cloud storage, and those monopolies of the internet also deal with the management, and through the management of data and cloud, can acquire new knowledge from data mining processes. So I wonder if that monopolies could break down also through the breakdown of the infrastructure of data storage, and not only through their, let's say, platforms and the internet interfaces that we usually interact. And another one point is that recently OpenAI has merged with the ex-Twitter and now is X. So new platforms that have risen, like Mastodon that was similar to Twitter, now in a manner backplaced by a new monopoly that is OpenAI, Neuralink, and X, and yeah, something like that. So we have a reinforcement of the monopolies of the internet. That was my two main questions.
I had a little difficulty hearing you, but as for the business of stocking data, this is, of course, essential for the advertising business that these people have developed. It's called, it's a different kind of advertising from what you have on television because it doesn't focus on the public in general, but rather on specific profiles of groups of individuals who might be interested in certain kinds of products. This targeted advertising is much more effective, apparently, than what you can do on TV. And I don't know how much data is in fact involved, how much more work is involved than would be required simply for the human purposes of the internet. But I imagine it's enormous. Huge amounts of energy are involved in the storage of the data from the internet now. And that will continue to increase as new functions are discovered, like the AI business, which also uses this data. So if the internet that we desire would not require this kind of storage and processing of data, and I think would be much more sustainable. As for the other, again, I'm not quite sure I'm answering your question, but I'll try.
Yeah, a new monopoly has been created that was, instead of a breakdown, a new monopoly has been created that is, let's say, monopoly of OpenAI and Neuralink and former Twitter X, the corporations of Elon Musk.
Yeah. The Twitter problem, again, has to do with the network effect. The fact that people are on Twitter already makes it very difficult for somebody to open up another bar, because there's no one, there won't be anyone there. Everyone's over in the Twitter bar. So to change this situation is very difficult. This is the fact that these resources, as we say, the network itself, belongs to a single guy who happens to be a kind of a nut, and a right-wing nut at that. This is not a good thing, and we would like those resources to be available to a wider range of companies. So I don't think that's inherently difficult. The people have a profile, and that profile could be available for different interfaces, different kinds of uses of the internet. So instead of having to move to a different, an entirely different system without any people in it, you could simply change the way in which the existing system is coordinated by different operators with different intentions, similar to the way the telephone system has been altered.
Okay, Professor, thank you. So I'm going to pose one and probably last question. It might be a little more technical about the notion you refer to. Generally, in your books, you argue that for every program, in the sense of Latour, an anti-program is created, and an ongoing conflict of values arises between them. And that's where the approach of Michel Foucault and Michel de Certeau enters in your theory. In your introduction about the critical theory of the internet in 2012, you refer to models of the internet which reflect the values of different social groups and the conflict between them. Now, in today's presentation, you refer to these models as programs. And so I wonder whether the community model, which, as I understand it, stands as an anti-program to the consumption one, loses its political dynamic if we perceive it as a program in Latour's notion. Because then I think the community program will generate an anti-program which I guess we wouldn't wish for. So I would like your opinion on this matter, and thank you.
Yeah, well, I think the anti-program of the community model was an original invention of the internet. And its anti-program is, in fact, the commercial program. So the anti-program of human communication on the internet turns out to be advertising, targeted advertising. And what we need is to somehow break that anti-program. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think that that's what I meant by talking about program and anti-program as far as the internet is concerned.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And we all thank you about your presentation. It was an honor for us to hear you. So. Thank you.